This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to The Late Show with James Radburn. Tonight, we're going to talk about Beyond Barriers, tools for tech in an inclusive education with my guest, Nikki Foote. So sit back, relax, grab a cup of tea or something stronger, and enjoy this conversation.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening and welcome to The Late Show here on Teachers Talk Radio, and thank you for joining us on what's going to be a really insightful journey into the heart of education and technology tonight. Tonight we have a very special guest, Nikki Foote, who is going to be here talking to us about Beyond Barriers, tech as a tool for inclusive education. Now, in a world where technology is rapidly reshaping the landscape of our lives, it's crucial we harness its power to make education accessible for all. And who better else to guide us through this transformative path than Nikki, who is an educator rich with a great range of global teaching experience and a massive advocate for integrating technology in the classroom. I know she's got a huge experience of coaching teachers as well. So she is very much a pioneer, very much someone who has got a boundless energy coming into this to coach teachers with this expertise. And hopefully tonight we'll explore some of those challenges, some of those opportunities that technology can really help us with, and what it can present as well in this inclusive, engaging learning environment. We may touch on topics such as AI, coaching, CPD, and see where tech is in the landscape in the UK, especially at the moment, and where it is worldwide, and what those next steps are. Technology is all around us. Technology can be transformational, and it is something we interact with every day, whether it is crossing the road, whether it is going to the ATM machine, and you see there's a headphone jack there. There's a lot of tools with technology that will enable people to interact within the world without being a bolt-on, but actually being embedded. And Nikki has got a real passion not only for education and technology, but also for allowing everyone that level playing field. And she's such an advocate. So I'm really excited to talk to Nikki tonight and to explore what her journey is and how she has got involved in education. So thank you, Nikki, for coming on tonight. And can you just share a little bit about you and your journey through education? Because I know you've worked both within the UK, but internationally as well. And I know that'd be a fascinating insight into your perspective as well in education.
So thanks so much for inviting me on. It's super lovely to be able to talk about accessibility and inclusivity from really my own perspective. I grew up and went to school in the 1980s, and I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 10. And I think during the 1980s, when you're dyslexic, and the 1990s really, you were really put into a lower set. And so throughout my school, I was in the lower set for everything, and really basically came out of that feeling very much like a failure. And so it's taken me a lot of confidence and a lot of growing throughout my adulthood in order to really find out who I am, what's really special about me, and own those unique qualities and see them as qualities, and then be able to work out what I can offer the world. And one of the things, I've always wanted to be a teacher, and so I went into teaching very, very early, straight out of school. I went and did a BA 3 years. And so by the age of 21, I was a fully qualified teacher. And it's really taken me a long time to kind of go back and reshape my values in education and sort of scratch out the bits that I didn't feel were appropriate or didn't feel that I really bonded with, and be able to then go forward and go, right, what am I going to focus on? What is really important in teaching? And so now, when in my mid to late 40s, I am very much passionate about accessibility, about inclusivity, about shining a light on all students' voices, and also working with teachers in order to help them understand the bits that they can't see. And I think being able to teach students with SEND needs takes a mindset change. It takes a shift. We see the world through our own lenses, and we teach from the lens of ourselves. And I think that teachers and educators need to look at what the lens they have on, what pair of specs do they have on their face when they are teaching. And is that about themselves, or is that about the students in front of them?
Right. So I think we're going to spend the next several hours, it feels like, just unpacking those couple of points you made. So there have been some fantastic things, and I'm such an advocate for text. And I know when we often have conversations, we have AI trying to catch up with us, and I'm actually using paper tonight of all things. But and I think this idea of a shining light is fascinating. But let's skip back, not to your childhood, because I think we'll come back to that.
That's a long story. We don't need to go back. The therapist is helping me with that one.
But let's go your journey as a teacher.
Yeah.
And I want to see what you went. So as an early teacher at 21, you hit the profession head on. What was that like for you as a teacher? What did you notice about the children? And how is that different in the different settings and countries you even worked in as well?
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I hit teaching, and my first class was in 2001, so slightly older than 21, 2001. I actually had Tyrone Mings in my first class, who has played football for England in the last few years. And that class was a mixed year 3-4 class. Lots of needs in an area of where I live. We've actually I come full circle. I now live in the area where I first started teaching after traveling around the world for about 15 years. And so that class was really interesting, so full of needs, so full of students were lacking in confidence, lots of relationships with parents that needed to be built up that I had absolutely no clue on how to do that. But interestingly, within the first 4 months, I had a Ofsted inspection. And I found the experience so stressful that I left teaching for a year after that. So I actually went in, did my NQT year, and then I left for a year, and I went and worked in a cake shop because I thought teaching was the most stressful job on the planet. And all I wanted to do when I was teaching was I thought about cakes, not because I could make them, because I really can't, but mostly because I like to eat them. And so, yeah, and when I look at that experience, I have come an incredibly long way. And so I kind of dibble-dabbled in teaching. I went and worked in Bristol, where I worked in a really lovely family school in a very affluent area of Bristol. I decided that I really couldn't struggle to work with students with needs because I didn't know what they wanted, and I wasn't able to change the way I was teaching for all of those needs within the class. And if you think about it, back then, we were going home in the evening and we were expected to write a list of everything of the conversations and the questions we would be having with the children. And then the answers we were expecting back. It was a dialogue that we had to go through, and there wasn't any deviation. And I felt, because I think, James, you know this, I'm not a massive one for following the path. And I felt that I didn't really fit. I didn't feel I had the talent in order to be a teacher, where I had to be so specialist all the time.
Is that a frustration out of the system, as in you couldn't do what you wanted for those children?
No, I thought I was inadequate. I thought I was absolutely inadequate. I thought I wasn't able to be in those days, you had to be, and I know a lot of teachers still feel like this, you had to be an expert in the room. And I didn't feel I was an expert at anything, quite frankly. Every time I taught something, I had to relearn it myself. So I was taking a lot of, I really wasn't able to own the curriculum. I wasn't able to own the journey or the experience. It wasn't about experiences that you were delivering or supporting the students in. It was about delivering an expectation. And it was so concrete that I felt that I couldn't live up to that. I wasn't good enough. And it wasn't until I moved abroad. And so I had my children and I was to the Caribbean. I worked in a small international school in the British Virgin Islands. And I had my children, so I didn't work full-time there. I worked part-time and I worked with students with needs. And I realised that it was about the students. I saw curriculum from a different way. It wasn't about curriculum and objectives. It was about a sequence or a scope that where you were able, had a pathway, and students had different pathways.
And so what was then that one or two things that flipped your mindset from doing teaching as a job? It would be a pay packet, and as you say, you had that frustration, and okay, yes, you went to the British Virgin Islands and you worked, and you've almost found that one thing that, especially in teaching, grabbed you and took you and motivated you. But what were some of those things that you saw or witnessed that were completely different and almost switch your mindset completely? Because there are a lot of teachers out there that are stuck in schools or stuck in a way that actually they're boxed in. They can't think objectively, and that often comes with time and experience to sit back and see, actually, yeah, okay, all those frustrations you had early in your career have made you who you are today. But so what are some of those things that you noticed over there that completely are different or switch your way of thinking?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because I wasn't quite sure what when you started the question, I wasn't quite sure what it was that had flipped me. But actually, thinking about it, when I grew, when I became Nikki that you know now, or started to become the Nikki you know now, was probably when I first had my taste of technology in the classroom. It wasn't my first taste. If we go back, we had the BBC computer. I might have had a Microsoft computer. I remember using some form of Microsoft program where you could create, I think it was a publisher thing that we used to create a school newspaper. But moving beyond that into my international education, and I had moved over to Singapore, we got one-to-one MacBooks. Can you imagine? One-to-one MacBooks in year 2.
They didn't get the money.
Hello. So can you imagine how long it took them to type in their login, their Google password and login, their email address to log in? And year 2, we used to spend the whole year. That was the target. By the end of the year, they could log in independently, or one of their targets. And then we moved to getting one-to-one iPads. And that became a game changer for me. And I started to get immersed in this tech world. And I went to... So in international education, it's slightly different in the fact that you are given a budget for professional learning for a year. And so it's normally around about $1,000 a year for professional learning per teacher. And so I started, in some schools actually, you can spend that on whatever you want. So I started to immerse myself down that technology route. And I mean, if we go back a little bit, I was always quite passionate about technology. I always found technology really easy. When I was at university, I used to earn money in the summer by working for a technology company where I would fix and build computers. So I could build a computer from scratch. And I could, I was very good at sort of online help, or not online, but on the phone help. If someone rang up the helpline, I could sit there and diagnose their problem, and I could talk them through how to fix it, or I could get on a bike and I could cycle off and go and fix it for them at wherever they were. So I did feel like technology was, I didn't realize it, but technology was my superpower at that point. And then so when I started to immerse myself in this technology world, that is where I realized that there was something really unique about education and the power that technology was able to put into the hands of the students learning and the teachers.
I love that phrase, tech is my superpower, because that's that one thing from you talking then and knowing you as well, how it's absolutely transformed you into this passionate teacher who is so willing to share and give and support and coach others.
Yeah.
But what is it about technology, and especially thinking about from you, and I know you alluded to earlier that you were diagnosed as dyslexic at the age of 10.
Yeah.
Is there a time when you've seen a child, we often say that light bulb, you've seen something you've done as an educator with technology on a child, and you've seen that light bulb moment, and you go back and think, and I don't know if you have the same feelings as me, you think, I wish as a child I had that. Yeah. And it's that bit.
If we look at my childhood, it was being pulled out of a classroom to be taught. And I often think back to this. I had no understanding as a child what the point was. I was dyslexic, and at the time they didn't realise, but I was ADHD as well. So I had not behavioural, but just very much couldn't focus, very short-term memory. Long-term memory was very hard for me to embed knowledge. Cognitive load was just where I would get overwhelmed quite easily or very tired. My reading was very poor. And it wasn't until now I'm a teacher that I realised, and I talk about this with students when I go in and when I'm working with students, so I work with students every day in the classroom and teachers. And I often talk about dyslexia, and I'm very open about that. So students, right, kids, I'm dyslexic. So when you're working with me, you need to be aware that I struggle with reading a little bit. And I show them explicitly on the iPad how hard it is for me to read. And it's so interesting how they become so motivated and brave to talk about how they feel. Quite often they're like, I feel like that too. Because for me, and I think Apple accessibility, when you look at, say, Safari mode, this is always a game changer in the classroom for me, is when you go Safari mode and you take up a website, cluttered, absolutely tricky to decipher the information. And as a dyslexic and an ADHD learner, you're looking at this and it's like candy. Your eyes are drawn to all those visuals and all the clutter around the corners, and all the text and the rich learning pieces are in inaccessible fonts, very close together. And when you look at the words, a sentence becomes one word to you. You cannot see the space. The space between the words for us is the same as the space in between each letter in a word. So that for me has been really, that's a game changer when I go into the classroom. But I did this week do something that I think is probably the most powerful thing I've done, and the impact, when you think about the impact that we have on student learning. And I think that's really important, that we look out for those pieces of impact. What impact am I making? And this week I had a spine-tingling shiver moment that was just beautiful. So I was working in a classroom with a group of students, and there are a lot of needs in this class. They're very excited. I am the iPad lady. I rock up and I teach them a lot of new skills, and I go in and I really try and go hard and fast on those skills. So I really give those students some high expectations of what they need to be doing in forms of digital literacy. And so I was working with them, and we were looking at inclusivity and accessibility as part of their global goals. And so I went in with, I don't know if you've seen it, James, the Apple Accessibility Sadie, I think it's called. And it's the video where it's all about what Apple Tech do. But then what we've got is a lady putting putting that movie together behind the scenes, and she's only doing it with her head movements. Have you seen that?
Yeah, it's one of the most powerful videos I've ever seen. And I don't know, like we're saying about some Apple stuff here, some of the Microsoft tools that are in there, and all of these absolutely phenomenal as well. But if you've never seen it, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's absolutely phenomenal how the technology that any of us actually have in our hand, whether computer, iPad, laptop, how they're interacting with it without any additions as well. And I think that's the fascinating piece behind it, because I often talk about when you cross a road, for example, when you've got the crossing and you've got a drop curb, you've got the bumps, and you've got the pole, obviously with the button that will stop. And I often say for every single one of us, there's a visual clue. It's where to cross safely. It's a reminder for children to stop. It's the ability to press a button so the traffic stops. And it's a useful feature for us all, but it's essential and necessary for some. So the blind or partially sighted, those physical bumps on the ground or the spinning under the traffic lights or the auditory tone, absolutely essential to know when to cross safely. For the deaf or the hard of hearing, it's the green man, knowing that element, or those with a physical disability, or parents with a pram, the drop curb. But what I like about that analogy almost is that it's built into what we do, and it's not an add-on, it's there for everyone to use.
Yeah, I love that.
And I think that's where looking at technology through that light is fascinating, and that video opens up the whole world in terms of what is possible.
What's interesting about what you're saying about the bumps in the road and the little divots and all the little buttons is that it becomes wallpaper for you if you don't know it. If you don't need it, it's just another creative design, or it's something interesting that's there. And in fact, you walk past most of these without even really signifying. If you're walking through a station, for instance, a train station, you don't notice that. And I was at an airport recently, and I realized that they're guiding you with the bumps on the floor. And if you're not blind or you don't have those needs, then you don't notice they're there. They become part of the pavement. They're just normal. And it's not until you realize and until you see it through a different lens that you realize what it is there for, what's that how vital it is. And I think this is about all accessibility features, is that if you are using accessibility features, then they are so key to not just to everybody, in so many different ways.
And going back on the flip side of that, so going back to when you were 10, let's say, and you said you pulled out of classroom, it made me think of when I worked with a child. I was one-to-one for about a term and a half who had a visual, who had, poor vision. And I think it was their distance that was a key thing. So we sat at the front of the classroom. She had a one-to-one. She had a big screen that would just mirror exactly what the teacher had on her screen. So she had to be very careful she didn't pick up emails or other things on there. And she obviously stuck out like a sore thumb in the classroom. And what was more fascinating was, yes, me and the teacher had a very good relationship, so we'd swap it. She didn't have that. We had to print things off big for her. But we're walking around school, actually, her vision, she knew where things were. for example, she had run that route every single day. I go back to my daughter. I know she's got stigma in her eye at the moment, and actually walking through, she knows where things are. It's new at situations. But if we make it so explicit, we take them out, we don't integrate it, we hold their hand, actually, we're almost putting a ceiling on what they can achieve. Yeah. And do you feel like that's maybe part of the frustration that you had as a child, maybe, and also as a young teacher, where there was a ceiling put there, and I think technology opens it up?
Yeah, you have hit the nail on the head. I think that as a child, there were no expectations. They were so low, and even as a teenager, I remember coming out at 18 and feeling like I'd absolutely failed. I actually got into university the second time running because I didn't get in at all to any teaching universities the first time I applied. I was the only student in my school that didn't get any acceptance offers, and I was mortified. And that absolute the concept of failure is very real for me. I am very comfortable with failure because I have failed loudly my whole life. And that is really what it is for students with needs. They are constantly failing. They become that they expect to fail.
And that resilience that comes alongside that is absolutely imperative. And yeah. I think after COVID and after lots of things, you talk to teachers about resilience. We need to actually open that world that, yeah, failing is okay, it's safe. This is what we do to pick ourselves up and go again. And I know Stephen Bartlett with his, he always talks about that's how you succeed. You have to be comfortable with failure. Like he has every podcast he does, and unfortunately we can't do this on Teachers Talk Radio, but it's like he does 90 iterations of the thumbnail or titles and actually seeing which ones work and which ones don't. And so failure is a key thing. And I think Richard Branson as well, there's some amazing, if you talk about dyslexia, for example, amazing people out there in the world. They found, okay, this is what I'm strong at. He didn't even know what net profit was until he was in his 50s and he had a multi-million pound company.
Yeah, I once met Richard Branson because he lives in the British. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you absolutely fine.
Are you laughing at that?
Yeah, I'm laughing. Claim to fame, like where can you?
I did once meet him and I sat down next to him for dinner because he lived in the British Virgin Islands and I lived there as well. So I got to go to a charity event that he was hosting on his island. I actually went to his private island. At the time, I was a stay-at-home mum, by the way, of 3 children under the age of 3. So you can imagine how delighted I was to go. But I talked to him all evening about dyslexia. And about how he got to where he is. And it is that fear of that we don't fear failure. We're quite happy to try and fail loudly and proudly because we've had it our whole lives. And our childhood was riddled with failure.
Let's go back to a phrase you said earlier, because you've talked a lot from the child's perspective and that failure element and how we've alluded to a few times how technology can open their eyes. And you said a comment, and this may come when we talk about CPD and professional development, that teachers in particular, ones you've seen at some points, see the world through their own lenses.
Yeah.
How can we actually open our eyes up as teachers to be in the pupil's shoes and see where their frustrations are? And how can technology be used to support it, to give those children a voice?
Yeah, I think it's having. I think professional learning comes with it as it's massive. It's hugely important in the journey. I think we don't know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. Sorry, and so I think we get very comfortable living in our rooms. And what you said earlier was that we are confined in our educational spaces. We're boxed in our classrooms. It's very isolating as a teacher. You are with the 32 children all day long. You very rarely have another adult come in the room. And so you get very attached to your safety network of whatever structures you put in place, whatever you think works in that space. You get to know those children very, very well. And so that responsibility is at times overwhelming. But I think that we need to be able to step out of that safety net, that box that we're put into. We need to be able to be offered opportunities to see other spaces, to see our colleagues teaching, so we can see something different, to be able to go to other schools, to be able to go and share practice, to be able to learn from each other and open up so that we begin to have more of a community. And I think if we start to change teachers' mindset so that we are constantly learning, research is going on. If you look at John Hattie, he's constantly trying to prove what he's done is either wrong. He wants to find those pieces that are wrong. He's absolutely welcoming anyone to come up to him and have those hard conversations about his research, because he's on a journey. We're all on this journey of trying to be much better at what we do and see things from a truer perspective. And so I think our teachers really need those opportunities in order to grow. They need a safe space to fail. They need a safe space to learn. They need a community that can support them and hold their hand along that journey.
So how do you do that then? I know you work in a lot of schools and you coach a lot of teachers, a whole range of teachers, ECTs, who want that control of their own classroom and feel very uncomfortable when someone comes in, or those who are very open to learning and will absolutely take any advice and bring it on, and they will try and incorporate it into theirs. So how do you get teachers out of their safety mechanism to go and see it from the child's perspective? Because I had, while you're thinking about your answer, I had this with the school I was working with. I was doing coaching and working with the teachers, and then at one staff meeting I planned 2 examples of lessons, and it was through maths. And I know in the school at that point, we were really focusing on the teacher explanation and using concrete resources, for example. And I taught an example lesson to the teachers, and the teachers were my children, essentially. And I deliberately, without almost picking up example too explicitly, I deliberately did things that I've seen in that school. And they were like, oh yeah, I really noticed that I didn't know what the next step was, or I didn't know how to show this, or they finished it really quickly without any depth and they were just messing around, which is what the children would do. And then when I changed it to the second part of the lesson, and I explicitly said, this is what I'm doing and why, and I modeled the lesson, and almost it was a lot less teacher talk. It was a lot more pupil explaining and actually doing the work, and then I could go around and challenge them. That opened their eyes. And sometimes seeing is believing. And I think if teachers can see what the challenges themselves are, that's brilliant. But I was very lucky in that situation, very lucky that I worked with that school and had that time to do something different.
Yeah.
And that's what the school needed at that time. So how have you done it, working and coaching with those teachers?
Yeah, I think that I'm very lucky as well, actually. I get to go in and see teachers repeatedly, the same teacher again and again. So I often do I get an opportunity to see one teacher, say, over a period of a year. If I think back to one of my favourite wow moments was a teacher called Sue. And she had high needs in her class. High levels of students who were EAL and very new to the UK. Mother tongue was of a completely a different language, and may have two different languages going on. plus coming to a new country. They were also transient, so they were living in hotels. They didn't have a permanent residence, and quite often had been split up from their parents and were living with a other family member. And there was one little boy so these children were in year 3, and I think we were talking about 90% of them were EAL. And she was very much full of lots of teacher talk, had been a very experienced teacher, Senko in the school, but really felt wanted to learn technology, but just felt very worried about it. And I went in and she was very, I would say, controlling about the students' behavior and about controlling the class. Everyone was very much set in their seating arrangements. And there was one boy in there who was selective mute, and he'd never heard his own voice. Sue had never heard his own voice. His peers had never heard his voice. And his parents had very rarely heard it. And if they had, it was in a tiny whisper. So I showed Sue, I went in for the first time, and one of my things that I think is really important is, number one, modelling failure, which luckily, as you know, James, comes naturally for me, especially when things don't quite go wrong in technology, as we've modelled today. But I think, modelling failure to them, knowing that you're not the expert, but you're here as a supportive person. I like to go in and say that I'm looking for the best things about that teacher or about that classroom. I'm looking for the brilliant things they already do, and I want to support them in those things to move them forward. I'm not looking for negativity, and I'm not in there to find the flaws in their teaching practice. So I'm very firm on that, and it's one of the first things I go in to say. I'm also very often say, look, I'm quite happy to sit here. What do you need from me? So if they are like Sue or other teachers that I work with that do have a lot of structures in place, and they are quite reluctant to hand over the reins of the class to me, then I go in as a teaching assistant, and I'm quite happy. They can plan the lesson and I will go and support. And what I often find is that within the first 10 minutes, they're very happy to hand that over. If I say to them, actually, I've got an idea for this. How do you feel if I just took the iPad and I just demonstrated a few things? They go, oh, yes. And then they'll hand over the reins. So I think for me, with teachers, it's about working out who they are, having those conversations. I don't have conversations with my teachers over email, really, very rarely. I like them to ring me or me ring them, or have a meeting on Meets, because I like to build that relationship with them. It's really important that we develop those really close, trusting relationships where they feel safe, that they know that I'm not a judge, I'm not going to judge them, that they know I'm only there for the students and the teaching and learning, and they absolutely trust that they are doing the best that they can. And so when I think about Sue, what happened with Sue was that I just showed her Padlet. And she was doing a lesson. She was doing a unit where she wanted to showcase the students making their own artwork. And I said, let's look at Padlet. And the students can post, and then they can see each other's, they can record their message. And so she used it. And within 4 weeks, she rang me at home and said, you wouldn't believe what's happened. And she sent me the work. And this one student had recorded his voice for the first time, and he'd heard his own voice. And from then, within about 6 weeks, he was telling stories, he was reading, he was doing so much online. It just opened up a new world for him. So I think that, for me, Sue was a game changer in just realizing she was my toughest client I'd ever had as well. So for me, working with Sue and going in, she scared the living daylights out of me, because I met her in the staff room in the morning and she was so officious and just quite frightening. And I thought, I am never going to move the mindset of Sue. But I did. And she is phenomenally talented and super creative and just wants the very best. And I think that for her, the brashness that I saw and I met at the very beginning was really because she didn't want to be judged. And she also wanted to protect her students. She knew them. And she didn't want someone else coming in and judging what was going on based on a one look. So from that, we had a year's worth of work, and it was really lovely. It was just it was an incredible experience for me, really.
What a lovely, heartwarming story. We're going to go and break for the news for a second, and then when we come back, I want to talk about the international scene, especially in the realm of technology, and then think about what's the future hold, especially we're in the precipice at the moment, and we had the BET show last week where I know Teachers Talk Radio were there, and the rise of AI, and how is that going to transform that and break down those barriers of education, personalised learning as well. But first, the news.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
Introducing EtonX from Eton College, a diverse range of quality online courses enabling young people to aspire and excel. Designed for self-study, these web-based courses empower your students with essential leadership, communication, and academic skills for success at school and beyond. Our Study Skills course sharpens their learning abilities, while the AI Fundamentals course equips them with vital digital know-how in a fast-changing world. Other popular courses include verbal communication, critical thinking, writing skills, resilience, creative problem solving, and many more. Offer the EtonX curriculum in your school for free. Visit etonx.com to find out more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
A £1,000 cash incentive and a campaign to raise the profile of childcare workers in England has been launched as part of a recruitment drive. According to the BBC, thousands of extra nursery workers and childminders are needed as the government plan to expand funded hours begins. The Department for Education says that more than 100,000 working parents of 2-year-olds have already registered for the April rollout. However, early years charities say the campaign to recruit is too late. By September 2025, all eligible preschool children of working parents from the age of 9 months will be able to access 30 hours of term-time childcare. Research suggests that the number of childcare providers is currently falling as childminders leave the role, although the number of places remains roughly stable. Data suggests that almost 28,000 early years specialists will be needed to meet the rise in demand, an expansion of 8%. The BBC also reports that staff at Scotland's exam body will take strike action at the end of February over a pay dispute. Around 400 workers will stage 2 24-hour stoppages, and the action will also include an overtime ban, a ban on weekend working, and a ban on accruing time off in lieu. The union said the industrial action would have a major impact on the SQA's ability to prepare for exam season, but the SQA itself said it had contingency plans in place and that the strike would not have any impact at all. The Herald in Scotland also reports on calls from some quarters to raise the school starting age. A motion filed by the Glasgow Kelvin MSP calls for a national conversation on early years education and argues that a new approach could help tackle Scotland's long-standing educational attainment gap. The proposal to raise the starting age secured cross-party support in less than 24 hours. It's not the first time that the SNP have called for an increase in the starting age for pupils, but with recent concerns that the school system in Scotland is not helping to close the gap between disadvantaged pupils and their non-disadvantaged peers, the plans have appeared again. Under the plans, children would start school at 6 rather than 4 or 5, and a kindergarten stage for 3 to 6-year-olds would be introduced, increasing the amount of early years education by 12 months, replacing Primary 1. The kindergarten stage would focus on learning through play. Full details of the proposal can be read online in a variety of media outlets. Finally, Schools Week covers demands from the University of Cambridge to delay the new teacher training framework. The university has said it lacks confidence in the new framework and suggests a delay of at least a year. The initial Teacher Training and Early Career Framework, or ITT-ECF, was unveiled by the Department for Education at the start of February. The ITT-ECF will combine and replace the currently separate ITT Core Content and the ECF from September 2025. The university called for the change to be implemented no sooner than September 2026, if at all. This would allow for further consultation, it says, and revision, as the new framework was just a tweak on the current one and was a wasted opportunity. The Education faculty at Cambridge also claims that the framework sets unclear and contradictory objectives for ITT providers. In the longer term, the university says a framework should be developed and led by a non-party political, cross-sector expert team. The new framework has already divided opinions in the schools community, and many have taken to social media to express concerns. The Department for Education have declined to comment. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Hello and welcome back to those who are listening live to us tonight, especially talking about Beyond Barriers, Tech as a Tool for Inclusive Education with our guest, Nikki Foot. Now, Nikki, as we enter the last 15 minutes of our conversation, there are 3 key things I want to talk about. One of them, one that I'm really interested about in particular, is your international experience. And I know we talked about earlier how that international aspect really revitalized you as a teacher and found your purpose, found that thing that you really grabbed hold on and transformed you into who you are now. So how does that approach of technology and education differ across the countries you've worked in, and what kind of things are there that we can learn from them?
Okay. So I was very lucky. I spent 6 years in Singapore, and then I did a really wonderful stint for 2 years in Beijing. I worked, and then I did a year in Bangkok. But my Bangkok year was COVID, so you can eradicate that from your memory. It was quite harsh. But the communities out there are incredible. I was very lucky to work at an incredible community called the Western Academy of Beijing, which is a not-for-profit school in Beijing. It's 25 years old, or probably 27 years old now, I would have thought. And it was the most incredible experience I've ever had the privilege of taking part in. They accept you for whoever you are, and the students. So teaching there is very different. They give you a lot of, total ownership. You have a curriculum, obviously. It was PYP, which we taught. So if you don't know, the primary years program, which is the primary curriculum, which is part of the International Baccalaureate. And so they were all 3 IB systems, PYP, MYP, which is the middle years program, that secondary sort of up to GCSE kind of curriculum, and then the DP, which is the diploma level, which is sort of A levels. And I was working in the PYP, and I've been very experienced in the PYP. I've been doing it for a lot of years, and it's inquiry based. The PYP is very low in content, and so what schools do is they take curriculums from around the world and they bring together the best bits of what they love as a community and put them together to make. So we had maths curriculum, say, from the States. We would do a New Zealand maths curriculum, actually, in one school, which is an incredibly rich maths curriculum. But what was really interesting was that the schools would really allow you to own your professionalism. They really believed in you. You could do what you needed to do in order to be the best teacher you wanted. So there was a lot of leeway in terms of experiences, in terms of coming out off timetable, for instance, creating experiences with your teams, the collaboration that we had there as a team in order to collaborate and create. And I don't say lessons. I find that very difficult now, because it really was about experiences. It was about creating something every day for the students that would inspire them, that would meet the unique needs of all the students. So we would say, often in our planning, would look at all students across the year level, and whether that was 120 students, and we would look at all the teachers and all the support assistants. So we might have 7 adults, and we would look at the unique pathways those students need. So if we were looking at repeated addition, for instance, we would look at what students needed in terms of skills, what their mastery level was, and then we would create these unique little groups based on what they needed. And that was a really exciting and interesting way. And it was so freeing from one teacher, 30 kids in the class, in order to meet the needs of those students. I think the other thing that was really interesting was the EAL element. So I spent a lot of time working with students who had English as a second language or third language, and often families would be there and would have 2 languages within the family. And so looking at learning from that perspective of fear was really interesting. So I say fear because students would come in to the school, they had transitioned into a new country, they had transitioned into a new community, they had no friendships, and they didn't have a language to hold them, to give them some form of security. So they were completely isolated. So you were able to, so I had a lot of training in order to how to create a safe space for students to learn, which is basically forgetting the learning and looking at and creating that safe, looking at what they already know and creating a bond and a connection between what they know now and what they've previously learned to what they you're needing them to learn. And so when you can make those connections and you deepen and strengthen those connections, they build that safety. So that, I think, was really interesting for me.
I think there's a theme here, is stepping back and having a look and going back to the why. Why are we doing and what are we doing? And yes, we have constraints, but actually there's quite a lot we can do within those constraints. And
yeah,
I think sometimes we're too quick to jump from one thing to another without thinking objectively and having that professional dialogue, but also the ability to step back. I think teaching is quite an emotive profession in some ways.
Yeah.
I don't think we always have that. So that in regard, what are your hopes, dreams, wishes for the future? And almost I think of, when I ask this question, I think of it, what did I wish I had as a pupil, when I was a pupil, and almost what I wish I had as a early career teacher as well. And what there is now is absolutely phenomenal. And then we'll talk about some of those barriers again in a bit. So what's your wish for the future for our children?
I really hope that we are able to create teaching and learning spaces where we are less focused on content and more focused on students and students' needs and students' experiences. Students are going to learn anyway. Learning happens regardless, and this is something that John Hattie says quite often, is that learning happens not because of us. The worst of us children still continue to grow. no matter what we do. So what we need to do is focus on less content. I would love that content to just be free, to allow teachers to go deeper, to really pick up on students' passions, students' excitement, and to be able to delve into those magic moments.
And how is technology then going to be at the precipice of this at the moment? Because we got it a lot in AI. We had the House of Lords who were talking about who were questioning the government. What impact is there with technology at the moment? So what do you want with technology that you've seen that, it's absolutely transformed this child, or it's transformed you as a teacher, and it opens those eyes and gives everyone that ability to have a voice? What role do you think tech has in this space?
Tech comes in so many different shapes and forms. So what I love about it is that it doesn't matter what your talent is, or what your skills are, or what you're excited about, what makes you tick and thrive. Technology can fit into all of those pieces. But the most important part is that it captures the imagination, it allows to develop creativity, and it also allows for students to be able to share their voice louder and bolder, or even to find their voice. And that's what I love about it. If I look at AI and then what AI is bringing in to teaching and learning, and I know there's a lot of fear about it, but let's look at how it actually frees up that cognitive load. How it frees up that cognitive load and in the terms of the teacher, and how they can create space in their day to do more, but also meet more needs, and meet more needs so uniquely and so beautifully and seamlessly and quickly. But also the more we see of it, and the more it gets sort of like layered within technology, I really hope that we start to see opportunities for expression where students can start to be able to connect with learning in a greater way and a deeper way.
I've just written down, find their voice. It brings me back to a time when I had a child in my year 5 class who I taught him in year 3 as well. And he wouldn't say boo to a ghost, anything. And he wouldn't raise his hand in class. He wouldn't really articulate himself. And there was a time where we had a class assembly, and I wanted him to make sure he had an opportunity, because I knew there was something in there. And one of the things I learned about him was he was such an advocate for rugby, absolutely loved it at the weekends, and that was where he found himself. And so at lunchtime, it was like a news report. Him and his friends, he recorded it. It was a safe space, green screen. The kids edited it, barely showed them what to do, and they did it. And I just remember sat in that hall when that came up at the beginning of the class assembly, just seeing his face, but seeing his parents' face.
Yeah.
And just at that moment, I was like, this is phenomenal. The ability that technology can absolutely turn something on its head, and it gives this child that voice and that ability to showcase their learning in a way that up until that point, you could say school had failed him.
Yeah.
I think that's the scary thing, but that's also the exciting thing at the same time.
Yeah, I think it allows this, if you look at assembly specifically, it allows students to be able to shine without being centre stage, without doing the thing that scares them the most. They can bring something to the party, everyone can. And that's what I love about that accessibility piece. And if you look at all of these tools that we have, if you're using those accessibility features, you are meeting the needs of every student, not just those ones with needs.
So I'm going to give you a challenge, as we've got to finish in a second at the end of this conversation. So what's that one thing, you want to tell our listeners, one nugget of information you want them to go away with in this idea of using technology as a tool for inclusive education?
Yeah, be playful. I would say that my one tip that I give every teacher, or that I would love to leave every teacher with and that they take away, is that find that tiny space in your time, in your classrooms, where you can be playful, where you offer the students the opportunity to play, to learn, and to actually lead you. Let them show you what they know, learn from them. And yeah, I really think that adding play and joy into technology releases that fear. It makes fear beautiful.
What lovely words to finish on. Thank you once again, Nikki, for such an enlightening conversation. I know we could probably talk for hours, but thank you for everyone who has talked to and listened on Teachers Talk Radio this evening, and I hope this conversation has sparked some interest for you. To listen back to Teachers Talk Radio, please download the Podbeam app or visit your favourite podcast player and search for Teachers Talk Radio. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple, or visit ttradio.org/listen back. Follow us on Twitter /X @TTRadioOfficial and tweet using the hashtag TTRadio. Thank you once again, Nikki, and thank you for listening. And until next time, goodbye.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.
And